The development of photography has allowed us to capture moments in time, moments in history. The further back we go, the faces of those involved dissolve and become paintings hanging on our walls, or worse still, figments of our imagination. These portraits arguably take us back as far as photography can take us into European history. These are the faces of men who 206 years ago survived the horrors of the Battle of Waterloo. These are men who would have laid eyes upon Napoleon Bonaparte himself.
In 1764, the Bouverie family purchased Delapré Abbey for £22,000, and during their ownership of the abbey, two members of the family would serve side by side in the wars against France.
Out of the French Revolution in 1789, a new France was born. One in which, by 1804, a Corsican by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte had risen through the ranks and been crowned Emperor of France. He was in no doubt a military genius, and he would give Europe a chastising of fire. He unsettled the balance of power and expanded his French Empire across mainland Europe. Battles would be fought from the depths of Russia to the mountains of Portugal, from the heart of Egypt to the Baltic Sea. Historians estimate the number of casualties to have mounted up to be somewhere between 2 and 3 million. So fierce in battle, it would take more than one nation to stop him. Only together could the Allied empires of Britain, Russia, Austria and Prussia stop him in his tracks. Meanwhile, back at Delapré, in the years leading up to Napoleon, the Bouverie family were a little more concerned with rumours and speculation surrounding certain sexual activity that was taking place behind closed doors.
Just coming!
The youngest child, Diana, was soon to be known as the Telltale Bouverie, as she looked so much like her natural father, Lord Spencer, with whom her mother had had an affair. However, it would be Harriet and Edward's third son, called Henry, who would distinguish himself against Napoleon's forces.
Britain had a long history of war with France, but when Napoleon enforced an economic blockade of trade with Britain on all the European nations, Britain had to act. Members of the upper classes across the country were sent their commissions, and they were deployed to Portugal to help Britain's allies fight off the French. It was here, in the Peninsular War, where Henry Bouverie, Henry of Delapré, would rise to military and diplomatic fame.
Delapré would eventually be left to Everard Bouverie in 1858, who made a name for himself as a horse breeder. However, in 1812, following in his uncle's footsteps, he joined the army as an officer in the cavalry.
He will then be sent to the Peninsular War, where his uncle Henry is still fighting, and they would serve together at the Battle of Vittoria, another decisive victory for England that saw an end to the Peninsular War and allowed Wellington to invade France itself. Not bad for a family outing. Now, if I can't help but swing a sword at some bushes and think myself an emperor, who knows what I'd be like if I could get my hands on a musket. Oh, this one will do. Well, I guess we get to find out, because I'm here with an armourer ready to experience firsthand the weapons that the Bouveries would have used and been up against. And one of the most common weapons of the Napoleonic Wars was the 1776 Charleville musket. It was in fact so popular that both the British and the French used it, which had one benefit on the field of battle, and that is if your enemy's musket was lying on the floor, you could pick it up and fire it right back at them. Now, having fired one of these things, it's very unnerving having an explosion like this so close to your face. And in fact, the steam from the gunpowder can scald you. So the soldiers, they used to grow out the hair on the sides of their faces, which would subsequently become known as sideburns. So there you go. It's not just influential on the battlefield, but also in the history of hairdressing.
All right, my life. Stay there. I'll move.
I'm going to do exactly the same again as you are.
Probably really hard.
Napoleon was the last man to have complete political control combined with military genius, rivaled only by those like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. After a series of defeats and a short term in exile in 1814, Napoleon was back in 1815 in one last attempt to keep hold of his empire. Wellington's army was tasked to stop him, along with the Prussians at the Battle of Waterloo. Delapré once again would do its duty. Everard would serve and be wounded at the battle. Our Everard fought against the men pictured in these photographs. They would have faced each other across the battlefield in 1815, a date immortalised in history for the defeat of France's emperor.
Can you imagine the stories that have been told over a cup of tea here at Delapré Abbey? Tales of love, adventure, conquest. Now, I would like you to imagine the look on one John Augustus Shield Bouverie's face when he inherited Delapré Abbey from Everard in 1871. Unlike his uncle, he was a police officer in Ireland and then became a corporal in the army. I mean, he must have felt like all his Christmases had come at once when he inherited such an estate. But it was his daughter, Mary Bouverie, who first opened up the abbey to the public. So today, the abbey continues to build upon her legacy.